I joined Earl as apprentice liar and thief in late October, and with no dwindling of the sense of momentousness, our secret jaunts continued as the weather grew colder in November, and then on into December when the Christmas decorations went up downtown, and there was an excess of men to choose from at just about every bus stop. Christmas trees were for sale right on the downtown sidewalks, something I'd never seen before, and selling the trees for $1 apiece for kids who looked to be either hardship cases or toughs recently released from reform school. Money changing hands like that out in the open struck me for the first time as against the law, and yet nobody appeared concerned with concealing the transaction. There were cops in profusion, cops with nightsticks walking the beat in their large blue overcoats, but they looked happy enough and seemed to be in on it. In on Christmas, that is. Big wind-driven blizzards had been whipping in twice a week since just after Thanksgiving, and so, to either side of the freshly cleared streets, grimy hillocks of snow were already banked as high as a car. Unimpeded by the late afternoon throngs, the vendors wrested one tree from the others, carried it a ways onto the busy sidewalk, and propped it on its sawed-off trunk to be sized up by the customer. It was strange to see the trees grown by some tree farmer miles from the city, massed along the wrought iron railings out front of the city's oldest churches, and leaning in piles against the facades of the imposing banks and insurance buildings, and strange, too, on a downtown street, to breathe in their rustic tang. There were no trees for sale in our neighborhood because there was no one to buy them, and so the month of December, if it smelled at all, smelled of something a hissing alley cat had tugged from an overturned garbage can in somebody's yard, and of supper heating on the stove, of a flat whose steamy kitchen window was open a crack to let in air from the alleyways, and the bursts of noxious coal gas spewed from the furnace chimney, and of the pail of ashes dragged up from the cellar to be emptied outdoors over slippery patches of sidewalk. Compared with the fragrance of New Jersey's damp spring and swampy summer and unsettled moody fall, the smells of a bitter cold winter were almost unnoticeable, or so I was convinced until I traveled downtown with Earl and saw the trees and took a whiff and discovered that with many things for Christians, December was otherwise. What with all of downtown strung with thousands of bulbs and carolers singing, and the Salvation Army band reveling, and on every street corner another Santa Claus laughing, it was the month of the year when the heart of my birthplace was subliminally theirs, and theirs alone. In Military Park there was a decorated Christmas tree 40 feet tall, and from the face of the public service buildings hung a giant metal Christmas tree illuminated by floodlights that the Newark News said was 80 feet tall, while I was barely 4.5 feet tall. My first trip with Earl occurred one afternoon a few days before our Christmas vacation, when we boarded the Linden bus behind a man who was carrying in either hand a department store shopping bag stuffed with gifts and decorated for the season in red and green. Just 10 days later, Mrs. Axman would suffer a nervous breakdown and be taken away in an ambulance in the middle of the night. And soon after that, on New Year's Day 1942, Earl would be whisked off by his father, stamp collection and all. A mover's truck showed up in late January, and while I watched, took all the household furnishings away, including the bureau with Earl's mother's underwear, and no one on Summit Avenue saw the Axmans again. Because the cold winter twilight now descended so quickly, following people home from the bus made us feel all the more satisfied with ourselves, as though we were about our business long after midnight, when other kids had been asleep for hours. The man with the shopping bags stayed on the bus past the Hillside line, and over into Elizabeth, and got off just past the big cemetery not far from the corner where my mother had grown up, above her father's grocery store. We got off after him, quietly enough, the two of us looking indistinguishable from 1,000 other local school kids in the standard-issue winter camouflage of hooded mackinaw and thick woolen mittens, and shapeless corduroy trousers tucked into ill-fitting rubber galoshes, with half of their maddening toggles undone. but because we imagined ourselves more concealed than we were by the deepening shadows, or because our adroitness was losing its power to time, we must have tailed him less skillfully than we practiced at doing, and thus compromised the invincible duo, as Earl had vaingloriously dubbed the pair of Christian trackers we'd become. There were 2 long blocks to traverse, both of them lined with stately brick houses, bright with Christmas lights, that Earl identified in a whisper as millionaires' mansions. Then there were 2 shorter blocks of much smaller, modest frame houses, of the kind that we'd seen by the hundreds on the streets that we'd traveled, each with a Christmas wreath on the door. On the second of the 2 blocks, the man turned into a narrow brick pathway that curved up to a low shoebox of a shingled house that poked up prettily out of the banked snow like the edible adornment on a big frosted cake. Lamps were burning dimly upstairs and down, and the Christmas tree could be seen twinkling through one of the windows to the side of the front door. While the man set down his shopping bags to get his key out, we drew closer and closer to the undulating white lawn until, through the window, we were able to discern the ornaments decorating the tree. "Look," Earl whispered. "At the very top of the tree. See that? It's Jesus." "No, it's an angel." "What do you think Jesus is?" I whispered back. "I thought he was their God, and chief of the angels, and there he is." This, then, was the culmination of our quest, Jesus Christ, who by their reckoning was everything, and who, by my reasoning, had fucked everything up, because if it weren't for Christ, there wouldn't be Christmas, and if it weren't for Christians, there wouldn't be anti-Semitism, and if it weren't for anti-Semitism, there wouldn't be Hitler, and if it weren't for Hitler, Lindbergh would never be president, and if Lindbergh weren't president... Suddenly, the man we'd followed, standing now in the open doorway, with his shopping bags, twirled around and softly, as though exhaling a smoke ring, called, "Boys?" As flabbergasted as we were by being caught, that I, for one, felt summoned to step forward onto the path leading up to the house, and then, like the model child I'd been 2 months before, clear my conscience by telling him my name. Only Earl's arm held me back. "Boys, don't hide. You don't have to," the man said. "What now?" I whispered to Earl. "Shh," he whispered back. "Boys, I know you're there. Boys, it's getting awfully dark," he warned us in a friendly voice. "Aren't you freezing there? Wouldn't you like a nice cup of cocoa? Inside now, children, quickly inside now before it snows. There's hot cocoa, and I have spice cake, and I have seed cake and gingerbread men. I have animal crackers frosted in all different colors, and there are marshmallows. There are marshmallows, boys. Marshmallows in the cupboard that we can toast over a fire." When I again looked at Earl to find out what to do, he was already on his way back to Newark,